Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to Fourth and Frames, our weekly fantasy football podcast here on the Fantasy and Frames podcast network, where we get you ready for every single week. I am your host, Jorge Edwards. With me, I got Keith Fleming from the Daily Fix podcast. Keith, you had Bob Harris on the show yesterday. Might be the most awesome person I've ever met in the fantasy industry. What was your impression of Bob when you had him on yesterday?
It was just honestly really incredible. I'd obviously have known and heard of Bob Harris for years in the fantasy football community, but did a lot of research knowing he was coming on the pod. And to say somebody's like an innovator or a legend, pioneer, whatever you want to call it, it's incredible all the stuff he's done. I mean, he was one of the first people to do a newsletter. 900 number. He wrote for Sports Illustrated, really, when fantasy football was still not that popular. Now he's got his own Sirius XM channel, basically. The fantasy's on 6 days a week, and just as kind and nice of a guy as you'd ever meet. Like, no ego whatsoever. When I would be a complete egomaniac if the roles were reversed.
Nice. Yeah, no, I think the first time I met him was at the very first Fantasy Football Expo. It's like, hey, Mr. Harris. She's like, hi, I'm Bob. I'm like, oh, right. Hey, Bob. And then the first year I met him, I was like, yeah, this doesn't feel right. I have to call you Mr. Harris. But I've since loosened up a little bit. But he's an awesome guy, a great person to talk to. I think the expo after that, 2021, they were broadcasting the Kings Classic on Sirius XM, and I saw him and I walked up to him. And I'm like, giving him a handshake, kind of like doing the shoulder thing. What's up, Bob? How's it going? Totally didn't realize he was live at the time. But fortunately, he saw me coming a mile away and like muted his microphone. He's like, "Oh, I'm on the air." I'm like, "Oh, sorry about that." Awesome guy. If you ever, folks, are out in Canton, Ohio, in August for the Fantasy Football Expo, make sure you introduce yourself and to Bob Harris, because he's a Hall of Famer in the industry, and just a great guy. So if you haven't already, go download the Daily Fix Pod. That's live now on Spotify and Apple and wherever it is you listen to podcasts. Make sure you follow their Twitter account, the Daily Fix Pod, on Twitter. And give Keith and Joe a follow at Keith Fleming, as you can see on the screen for those who are watching, and then at Joe E. Matz. Just fantastic DFS advice all season long. And of course, as we're talking about week 17, this is the week where fantasy football championships are won and lost. DFS, it keeps going, and we're going to keep going here with the Daily Fix all the way through the Super Bowl. So it's going to be, there's plenty of fantasy football content left, and we're very lucky to have Keith and Joe with us to help us and help you along your way to DFS success. So as you may know, it's 9:39 East Coast time. We normally broadcast 8 p.m. on Wednesdays. A random episode, but we wanted to get Fourth and Frames in. So this is going to be definitely a condensed episode this week.
Well, sort of condensed with me on, the episodes.
There's no harm in adding all the information you have. I'm sure all the fantasy football fans out there, especially this week, who are already on edge because they want to win that championship and not lose, they could definitely use that information. But anyhow, I blame myself for the reason why we're broadcasting later. I came down to Charlotte, North Carolina for the Duke's Mayo Bowl for my University of Maryland.
They wouldn't have won without you there, though. So
let me tell you. So first of all, I didn't realize that NC State was ranked 23 in the country. I didn't know they were ranked.
A good team.
So the fact that we beat a ranked team. The second thing is, this game was as sloppy as it could possibly get. Like, nobody wanted to take the lead and hold it. Nobody wanted to score touchdowns. Eventually it got to a point in the fourth quarter where Maryland's like, okay, fine. I guess we'll make an extra play, get the game-sealing interception, and I guess we'll win this thing. And one of the traditions at the Duke's Mayo Bowl is that they douse the winning head coach with mayonnaise. And so the head coach for Maryland, Loxley, he had on – do you remember a few weeks ago Brian Robinson put on one of those –
Yes, the giant – oh, yeah.
Yeah, so Loxley had one that said the Maryland logo on it, and he thought he could get away with wearing that while they poured the mayo on him. And so they poured the mayo on the hat, But then they saved just enough mayo so that when he removed the hat, his head was exposed. They ended up dumping the rest of the mayo on him. Dude was pissed.
That is my nightmare, Jorge. I hate
Getting mayo dumped
mayonnaise.
on you is the
Just
nightmare?
mayonnaise, period. Like, I hate the taste of mayonnaise. I'm always like, no mayo on any sandwich I order. And that would literally cause nightmares for me. If I knew there was a chance, I probably would throw the game if I knew it was going to mean I was going to get a barrel of mayonnaise poured on my head. My wife would enjoy it, though. She loves how I freak out when I ask for no mayo. And even if there's just a little bit on it, I taste it and immediately I'm like, I need another sandwich.
Well, if you ever were to convert to the other side and have any mayo product whatsoever, definitely go for Duke's Mayo. Wink. Potential sponsor, maybe not one day. You'll never know.
Come on, hook us up.
That's right. So anyhow, as I said, we're going to be coasting through this episode, just giving you some plays and fades at each position on offense. For more information, definitely head over to fantasyandframes.com. Check out all of our articles that we pump out religiously every single week, every single day, leading you up to game day on Sunday. And, of course, our rankings, which we're updating daily all the way through kickoff on Sunday evenings or afternoon, excuse me. Just so much work we put into it. We've put into this season. A lot of awesome minds, awesome analysis. Just the entire Fantasy and Frames crew. We love what we do. We love the content we put out there, and we really take pride in the effort and the amount of research we put into getting you all the information you need to win your matchups and hopefully win a fantasy championship or two or three or multiple this weekend. So we're going to forgo plays. We're going to forgo news and notes. We'll get into all that on our pregame show, which will be this Sunday, New Year's Day. You will see our faces, maybe slightly hungover, not depending on how New Year's Eve goes. But we will be there 9:30 a.m. Eastern all the way through noon, getting you ready, going over every single game, all the fantasy relevant players on offense and for IDP, as well as answering all of your start and sit questions for Week 17, the most important week in non-DFS fantasy football. So with that, let's just get into our plays and fades for Week 17. And again, if you have more questions, send them our way on the YouTube or Twitter or Facebook channel feeds. We'll answer your questions tonight. And then, of course, on Sunday, let's go with some plays here. I look at the quarterback position. I'm excited to see Mike White back for this Jets offense. You look at the Seattle Seahawks, they're allowing 17.4 points per game to the quarterback position. That's 12th. You just saw them get eviscerated by Patrick Mahomes. No, I'm not saying Mike White is Patrick Mahomes, but let's
compared to Zach Wilson, he is.
Compared to Zach Wilson, he is. I love it. Look, as Mike White goes, so does his Jets offense, and he goes really well. You look at Week 12 versus Chicago, 28 passing attempts. And one of the things I like to look at here is I like to look at the volume a player has, and does that translate into fantasy production? So Week 12 versus the Bears, 28 attempts, almost 25 points. Week 13 versus the Vikings, 57 attempts, 19.5 points. I guess the outlier you could say here is Week 14 versus Buffalo, 44 attempts, only 10.7 points. But let's remember that was the Buffalo game where basically every other play he was getting knocked to the ground by this defensive line.
Pretty sure they broke his ribs in that game.
They did break his ribs.
Yeah.
They broke his ribs, and that week he wanted to come back and play the following week. He went to 7 different doctors trying to get one of them to medically clear him to play that week. All 7 said no, and that's why you haven't seen him for the past couple of weeks. But he's coming back this week. And you look at how well, these receiving options have played with Mike White versus with Zach Wilson. Let's talk about, the other Wilson, Garrett Wilson. Week 12, 95 yards, 2 touchdowns, almost 24 points. Week 13, 162 yards, 20 points. Even against this tough Bills team in this matchup where he got his ribs broken, Mike White, that is, Garrett Wilson had 78 yards receiving for 10.5 points. So it's and even Elijah Moore saw success. Week 12, 64 yards and a touchdown. Week 13, that was an outlier. Corey Davis had 80 yards in that matchup. But then again, Week 14, 60 yards. So Zonovan White, gets targeted in the receiving. So he gets the ball to all these playmakers, which gets you yardage, which gets you fantasy points. And against the Seattle team, which this doesn't need to be a back-and-forth shootout for Mike White to find success. It's not like they have to be trailing per se. I think the Jets are just going to play that well. I'm curious to get your thoughts on Mike White here heading into this week versus Seattle, Keith.
Yeah, I mean, I love White. Garrett Wilson is one of our favorite plays this week on the daily fix because he's just a completely different receiver with Mike White in. The Seahawks are a defense that, they typically slow down receivers, but I've brought this up a few times the last couple of weeks. They played Detroit without St. Brown, the Rams without Cooper Kupp, Cardinals without DeAndre Hopkins, Chargers without Josh Palmer, Keenan Allen, 49ers without Samuel. They played a weak slate of QBs, which even makes it, more impressive, or I guess less impressive, that they're giving up 19 points per game. White's, averaged 18 points per game in his 3 starts. The biggest thing to me, he's been a top 10 QB 2 out of 3 weeks. He's third in expected fantasy points this week at the QB position per game. And I just think that the Jets need this. If you saw, I don't know how it came out, but they actually had a video on Twitter I saw today of the media members finding out, it's the local media, that Mike White was not going to be able to play the Lions game. And you would have thought they found out somebody died in their family, because they knew it was such a big game. Right. And the team is just not the same without him. I mean, they really look like a true contender those 3 weeks he was playing. I know they lost 2 of those games, but they hung tight with Buffalo and Minnesota, 2 of the better teams in the league. And I think the Seattle team is just kind of free falling. I think they're going to have trouble scoring against a good Jets defense. And I think Mike White is definitely going to do enough. I think Knight is a decent play this week too. But I don't know if he's the kind of running back yet that can kind of dominate a game. And one thing I like about White too is he's had at least 1 red zone rush all 3 starts. So there is a chance he gets a rushing touchdown, which he did, I believe it was in the Buffalo game or the Minnesota game. So, there's a lot of opportunities for him. And again, I just don't think the Seattle secondary, which is very lauded by a lot of people because their numbers against receivers, when you look at the receivers that have missed and then some of the QBs they've played, I don't think they're quite as tough. And their defense has really struggled the last month and a half.
Absolutely. And, on the flip side for, coincidentally this game, I'm fading Geno Smith this week. We look, you talked about how good the Jets defense has been. It starts with Quinn and Williams up front. Let's look at the last couple of games when they faced pretty decent, pass rushers. Chris Jones last week versus the Chiefs, and the pass rush in week 16. Geno Smith was only able to put up 215 yards and got you 12 points against one of the best, arguably the best defense in all of football, the San Francisco 49ers. He only put up 238 yards for 15 points. I just feel like this offensive line has just been getting exposed. And Geno, he's losing. Tyler Lockett was out a couple weeks ago with a broken hand. I don't remember if he came back last week or not.
No, he's still out.
So, again, you're taking away one of these weapons. Marquise Goodwin was somebody that I think a lot of us were kind of like hoping would take on a bigger role. He put
a big whiff last week for us.
Yeah, a big donut there for a lot of people out there. So, you're just not seeing the consistency. The rushing numbers are going down progressively each and every week. And again, the secondary for the Jets is no joke, as is the linebacking core. This defense as a whole is just fantastic. So as Mike White increases in value, I think you're seeing Geno stock fade there. So those would be my plays and fades at the quarterback position. And again, for more options as far as who to start and who to sit this week, head over to fantasyandframes.com. Read our start and sit article for week 17. Jonathan Klanaski, one of our senior writers here, just put together and has been putting together fantastic content, hitting a lot on his players all season long. So just head over to fantasyandframes.com today. Going now to the running back position, I got somebody that I feel like, whether it's you and Joe, whether it's Nate or Tyler or myself, I feel like the name Tyler Algier, it must have been said on one of our shows at least like 100 times the past 2 weeks for very good reason. You look at his production, he's been weeks 14 through 16, 35 attempts, 35 rushing attempts for 231 yards, 6.1 yards per carry, averaging 17.9 per game. There was a point where I want to say last week, heading into last week, I was concerned. What is the situation here? We saw with Green Bay the model of like both running backs could have success, and then we were thinking, okay, well maybe Algier and Patterson can coexist and also have that success. But the efficiency of Tyler Algier and his 6.1 yards per carry average, that is ridiculous. And he should definitely have a good matchup this week. He is your, I believe, bargain play at 5,300 for DraftKings this week.
Yep.
And you being the resident Falcons fan, what are your, two-parter? What are your thoughts on Algier for this week? One, and two, going into next season, is this a name that people should definitely be bookmarking and saying, I want to target this person early in drafts?
Absolutely. I think that he is going to be the main back in our offense next year. And whether it's Ritter, who looked better, thank God, last week than in his first start, or, I mean, if we lose our last two games, they're going to be in a position where if they want to take another quarterback, they can. And teams have done that. That's the advantage of taking a guy in the third round is if you want to take a first-round quarterback, the next year in a quarterback league, I don't think it's a terrible move if you believe that guy can be, a good quarterback in the NFL. But I mean, Algier has just the big thing is he's out-touched Patterson 40-24 the last 2 weeks. After seeing basically 10 carries per his first 12 games, he's seen 17 and a half the last two average. Another big thing, Arizona is terrible against the run. They've allowed 5 running backs to score 15 points or more in PPR leagues in just the last 3 weeks. They've allowed 12 touchdowns to running backs in their last 8 games. And the big thing for me, and it's why I have not been on Algier as much as other people until this week, is I didn't like that he rarely ever saw red zone carries. He saw 4 last week. He had only seen 3 the previous 5 games. So the fact that they finally went to him in the red zone, now I'm all in on him. I think he's definitely worth the price on DK. I think he's a worthy start this week in championships. I think he's a RB1 this week for sure. I would be surprised if he doesn't score a touchdown. And he's been so close. If you have a 100-yard bonus so many times this year, I think he's going to go over 100 yards this week too. It's just a great matchup. And if Ritter can just throw the ball a little bit, I think Algier is going to have a really big game because teams can't stack the box. But even if they do, again, Arizona is not a very good defense versus the run. I mean, just look at some of the running backs that have torched in the last few weeks. No offense to Latavius Murray, but I don't think he's one of the best backs in the league. He had almost 100 yards. I think it was 1 or 2 touchdowns. So I think he's going to have a big game, and he's got a really bright future. He surprised me. I was not that high on that pick. I thought the Falcons had a great draft, but that was one that I was kind of like, really? And he's been incredible when given opportunities and seemed to just get better as the season went on.
We saw last week, was it Leonard Fournette has a Liz Frank foot injury, I believe.
Yep.
The guy with 1 foot, 1.5 feet was able to torch the Arizona Cardinals. So I think Algier is in a good spot. As my other running back play here, as I like Zonovan Knight this week. As Mike White goes, like I said earlier, so do the skill position players here. Look back weeks 12 through 14, week 12, 17 touches. Let me pull up this fantasy point production there. See here, 17 touches for 69 yards rushing, 34 receiving. And then let's see here, week 13, 15 attempts for 90 yards. His yards per carry is around 5. 17 attempts, in week 14 for 14.7 yards. So he's not giving you RB1 numbers, but he's definitely giving you solid RB2 numbers this week. And so if I have to roll with him as my RB2, I'm feeling pretty confident in my my upside there against this play.
At least 15 points in PPR leagues all 3 weeks that White starts, including it's a really good Buffalo defense.
Yeah, yes, definitely. You look at Seattle; they're allowing the second most points, fantasy points, to the running back position. So definitely that. You spoke of bonuses, and I look over my shoulder because my buddy Ken Sonnenberg, I'm sharing a room with because we went to the Duke's Mayo Bowl together. His league is notorious for having bonuses for all sorts of things for 100-yard games. And so I've been on the losing end of a good couple of 99-yard performances. And so I definitely have an issue with bonuses when they don't work in my favor.
Absolutely.
Anyhow, getting back to this thing, I think Zonovan Knight may not be that running back who gets you the 100 yards rushing, but I think the total yards and the total attempts are going to get you close to 100 yards, definitely. So definitely like this. Player I'm not too high on is Najee Harris. Baltimore is very stingy against the run. And you look at how Patrick Queen and Roquan Smith have been playing in recent weeks. It's just not looking good. This pass rush for Baltimore, as the linebacking core goes, as the secondary clamps down, just is not good. The Raiders basically handed the Steelers a Christmas present last week, in more ways than one. And I don't think Najee is just this offensive line is still playing bad. I expect Baltimore to kind of just control the time of possession, and if anything, this is a Jalen Warren game for Pittsburgh than it is, I think, more so a Najee game in terms of like productivity. Just because I think this linebacking core, like I said, with Patrick Queen and with Roquan Smith, just elite run stoppers, and I believe they have their top 20 run stopping percentage according to PFF the past 4 weeks. So it's not looking good for Najee this week. You agree with that, or you have a different take on that?
No, I think we spoke a little bit, briefly before we went on there. I really don't like Pittsburgh in this spot. Rookie quarterback going to Baltimore, Sunday night game. It's supposed to be cold. It's not a good spot. And I think they have to throw the ball in order for Najee to be successful, because there's got to be, concern that they can get beat deep. And Baltimore's been one of the best defenses in the league since about week 4 or 5. So I don't like that. The other thing, I just feel really bad for people that, had the Raiders duo of Jacobs and Adams. I mean, it's like the Grinch. The Niners are probably the best run D in the league. Just over the last 5 weeks since they've gotten healthy, you look at guys like Eckler, Kamara, averaging under like 4 yards per carry. Some of those guys are averaging under 3 yards per carry. Haven't given up a touchdown to any of them. And then on top of that, you got Jared Stidham now as QB. So it's just Josh Jacobs is a guy this week. I would seriously consider benching him if I was in a championship matchup, if I just had anybody in that running back like 12 to 20 range, because I just think it's such a terrible matchup, and it's not like they're going to be able to throw on that Niners D, I don't think. So he's just going to have no room. They're going to stack boxes, and it's just a really bad situation for, the number 1 running back in football. Adams was like the number 2 or 3 receiver in football. And it's just, for fantasy all season. And it's like, great, I get the Niners for the championship with Jared Stidham as QB. Not exactly what you want.
Not so much, no. And from a real fan perspective here, a couple questions, as opposed to a fantasy football fan. The whole Derek Carr, I'm taking the final 2 weeks away from the team to not be a distraction. Do you think that's just a, cop out there, or do you think there's some validity to doing that?
I think it's just an ugly divorce. He's not going to be back next year. I don't know where he's going to go. Maybe Indy. He needs a fresh start. Maybe Indy's a good, location for him. But it's just, I don't. Yeah. I mean, to a certain extent, I understand what he's saying, but I just think it's a deal where like they're both done with each other. They know they're both done with each other, and he's just peace out.
Yeah, no, I hear you. It's going to be interesting what the fallout is with Devontae Adams heading into next year, whether or not he's able to force a trade if that's something he wants to do. Although with this contract, I don't know many teams that want.
Yeah.
If anything, if there's a team that could potentially afford this contract,
hell no.
It's the other team.
I was going to say the Atlanta Falcons.
No, well, no.
Hell no.
No, but it's the team that offered him a similar deal and he turned down, and that's Green Bay.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting how that will go into next week. Let's talk about wide receivers now. Let's talk about some plays. Let me do mine really quickly. Garrett Wilson, again, I'm all aboard the Jets this week, averaging 112 yards per game when Mike White is the quarterback. The fantasy production is there. The touchdown upside is there. Just give me – it's all Jets. Give me all Jets, except for Elijah Moore and the tight end, Conklin, and what is it, CJ Uzoma. I love these star players for the Jets. So Garrett Wilson's mine. Who's yours, Keith?
It's your boy, Jahan Dotson. He's wide receiver 31, 16.4 points or more in full PPR leagues the last 3 weeks. 7 touchdowns on 50 targets, which is just absolutely absurd. And he's played 80% of the snaps in 6 games, including the last 3. In those 6 games, 3 receptions, 40 yards, 2 touchdowns, 18 points. 4 receptions, 59 yards, 1 touchdown, 17.9 points. He had 1 bad game, 2 receptions, 10 yards. That was early in the season. In the last 3 weeks, 5 receptions, 54 yards, a touchdown, 16.4 points. 4 receptions, 105 yards, 1 touchdown, 23.5 points. and 6 receptions, 76 yards, 1 touchdown, 19.6 points. The Browns are going to play man. They normally do. They're going to bracket McLaurin, which is only going to mean Dotson is going to be running free and wild. Wentz, I think, raises his ceiling because obviously he's a really good down the field passer. And then the Browns D has really struggled with big athletic receivers. Jamar Chase, 10 receptions, 119 yards, a touchdown. Mike Williams, 10 receptions, 134 yards. Garrett Wilson, you're just talking about 8 receptions, 102 yards and a touchdown. And Corey Davis, 2 receptions, 83 yards and a touchdown. Dotson is my favorite play on DK this week. He's in basically every one of my lineups. I think he's guaranteed to score a touchdown, and I think there's a good chance he goes over 100 yards because I really do think they're going to try to shut down McLaurin, which is a mistake because for whatever reason, Wentz does not go to him at nearly the rate that Heineke does, but he is their best receiver. That makes sense, but I think Dotson's going to have a monster game on Sunday.
No, you hit it right on the head, and I don't know who's going to shut down McLaurin more, Washington and Carson Wentz,
right?
Or the Browns secondary. No, I like it. I believe Dotson is your flex bargain play here at 4,600 heading into this week. Look, every game he's played, he scored a touchdown. And you go back to the preseason, you look at the training camp, the mini camps, all that. All you've heard was, man, Wentz is developing quite the connection with Jahan Dotson, and you were seeing it earlier in the season, and obviously the injuries to Dotson, the hamstring injury, versus Dallas kind of derailed that. But all aboard this. We got Gary Wilson and Jahan Dotson. Any fades here for the wide receiver position?
Yeah, again, just sorry, Devontae Adams. Weird situation for him because obviously he's really close with Carr, so I'm sure he's not happy about that. I think he said some things publicly that he still supports him. And Jared Stidham, I don't like picking on QBs, but I had to go back and look. Since 2020, Stidham has 3 starts with at least 10 throws. In those 3 games, 34 passes. He's combined for 168 passing yards, 3 picks, no touchdowns, and he's playing the San Francisco 49ers. Not good.
Not so good.
It's going to be rough. The 49ers at 2,900 on DK. Me and Joe were talking about every once in a while things align where, they put out that price tag thinking Carr was going to play,
right,
and then he's not, and it's just like you should jump on it. It's just I don't know how the Raiders score double-digit points. Like, honestly, it's going to be a really rough game for them. I think it could get out of hand early. I expect a lot of sacks because the Raiders have struggled in pass blocking, and I definitely expect Stidham to turn it over. And again, he's had 3 starts where he's thrown a good ball a good bit. He didn't have a touchdown. So unless he's really developed in the last year since his last start, things are bad for Devontae Adams this week.
You know who's going to be a star for the Raiders? Daniel Carlson, the kicker, who's probably going to be the most productive player there for fantasy.
It'll be like the ball game you're at today.
Yeah, if only that good. But I'm not complaining. Maryland won, so whatever. Let's go to the tight end position here. Who do you got for us at tight end, Keith?
The fade is Pat Freiermuth. He's tight end 10. The Baltimore defense, again, is just playing spectacular, and I don't expect Kenny Pickett to play well in this situation. Sunday night game on the road versus their bitter rival. Early in the season, the Ravens really struggled with tight ends. They gave up 4 touchdowns in their first 5 games. Since then, only 2 touchdowns in their last 10. Granted, one of them was to Freiermuth in their last matchup, but again, that was a home game in Pittsburgh. I expect things to be different, and I don't see Pittsburgh's offense getting going versus this Baltimore defense in a Sunday night game where that crowd's going to be insane. Those two franchises hate each other. And it's a really bad situation for a rookie QB. Steelers' offensive line's not great, so I would fade for Freiermuth.
All right. And now in terms of one of your tight end plays you have this week in your median group, Evan Ingram. Boy, has he just become a resurgent player. He's looking just as good, if not better, than his rookie year, which is, I think, the last time he was fantasy.
Don't tell that to Joe Matz. As a Giants fan, he is not thrilled about what's going on with Ingram right now. But it's insane. So his last 4 games, he has 40 targets, at least 7 in each. That's 43% of his total this season. 31 receptions, at least 5 in each game. That's 45% of his receptions on the season. 367 receiving yards, which is 50% of his receiving yards. 3 touchdowns, which is 75% of his touchdowns. And like on DraftKings, he scored 91.7 points in the last 4 games, averaging 22.9 at least 14 in each, and that's 53% of his total on the season. And Houston is not a great defense. They're 20th in points allowed on DK. And in the first matchup, he saw 10 targets, had 6 passes, scored 12.9 points. I think he's got a great matchup. You mentioned Conklin, though. I like Conklin as well. Seattle is such a bad defense versus tight end. Dead last. They give up almost 15 yards. Or actually, no, excuse me. After last week with Kelsey, they give up over 15 yards per reception tight ends, which just seems impossible today with the tight ends that we have in the league. Conklin's had 4 double-digit games this year, 8 games of 7 points or more, which again, fantasy, if you got Kelsey, that's not bad. Right. His best game was versus the Pats. He had a monster game with 2 touchdowns. The Pats are 4th in the league in touchdowns allowed per game. Seattle is just behind them at 5th. I just think there's a good chance that maybe he finds the end zone because Seattle seems to almost give up a touchdown. I think it's like 0.82 touchdowns per game this season to tight ends. And again, he hasn't had a monster game with White, but this is really the first really great matchup he's had versus a bad defense versus tight ends. And again, if you want to say that it's not the receivers missing games and bad quarterbacks, maybe they are just better against receivers, meaning that, to your point, you're going to see more passes to running backs, tight ends. So I do like Conklin as kind of a flyer, and he's really cheap on DK at like 2,900 this week.
Very nice. And so those are our plays and fades we have for you on Fourth and Frames here this week. And of course, for more starts and sit options, head over to fantasyandframes.com, read our week 17 start and sit article by Jonathan Klonowski. Tomorrow, which is going to be Saturday for those who are listening to the pod.
Go Dogs.
Go Dogs, exactly. We will be having our weekly Chasing Upside article for offense, where we look at players that are outside, the top 20 or so in ECR consensus, and telling you players that we think can exceed expectations at all the positions, whether it's for offense and for IDP. So look out for those articles. And of course, you can check out all of our content at fantasyandframes.com or rankings at fantasyandframes.com. Not to mention, we put everything in video form on our TikTok and Instagram accounts. We put in everything in graphic form on our Instagram accounts. We have everything on our Facebook that we put everywhere else. So wherever you have, a social media account, Fantasy and Frames is there. So make sure to check out our content there. And of course, for those who are watching here on Facebook and Twitter and on YouTube, thank you very much. Don't forget to subscribe over on YouTube. We're growing out that channel there. So really appreciate all your support this season. Thank you for tuning in each and every week to Fourth and Frames. And we'll be doing a year in review, a little pod here before we go on hiatus for, I don't want to say, a good chunk of the year, but for at least a couple months. But you have us for another week at least. So
you got me and Joe though for another month. So
exactly,
you can't get rid of us.
And you should definitely, if you haven't already, download Shoot the Gap for Week 17, our IDP podcast, where we talk about players we like, the plays and fades there. And coming up, soon, we're in Dynasty mode. Tyler Heil, the head of our Dynasty department here with the Dynasty 365 podcast, that's going to be coming back in full force. Him and his new co-host, Bill Mustafa, are going to be covering everything from salary cap to, rookies to, you name it. Just basically everything we did last year times 10. And of course, and we covered a lot of players extensively. So we're excited for all the Dynasty content we're going to be bringing you. So a lot of great stuff here. We got a question here from Marcos on Facebook. Half PPR, Waddle, Hopkins, Godwin, McKinnon, 2 wide receivers and a flex. Thank you. Do you want to take this first, or can I go first?
Sure. I mean, it's whatever you want to do. For me, I don't want to say it's easy, but I'm definitely starting McKinnon.
Yeah.
That half PPR with what he's been doing, the monster game he just had versus Denver. I don't know, it was like 3 weeks ago. Mm-hmm. And then for the other one, I think I got to go with Godwin. Even in the first game, he didn't do much, but he had 7 receptions for 43 yards. So it just shows that, his freaking floor is so high to where Hopkins, I mean, if McCoy plays,
he's out.
He's out. Then I would not play You couldn't pay me to play Hopkins.
No, right.
I think if you need a home run play, I might consider going Waddle. over Godwin, but the Pats did a really good job in week 1 slowing down that Miami offense. They only scored 13 points. I know they scored 20 in the game. They had a defensive touchdown. And New England, it's at home. I really think Godwin McKinnon is, safe plays. And both of them have a chance to go off to where Waddle and Hopkins, maybe they have higher, ceilings potentially. But
Right.
man, like I could see both of them, having like a 3-4 point game and, losing you your championship.
Here's the thing. I think so. We have to pick 2 wide receivers in the flex. So 100% with McKinnon.
Oh, I'm
the
sorry.
flex.
I didn't see the 2 receivers on the
Oh yeah,
flex.
no,
So I
that's
would
cool.
go Waddle, Godwin, McKinnon.
I agree with you 100%. Even at the end of the day, you have to temper your expectations here for Waddle and Hopkins. But the question is, do you trust Teddy Bridgewater to get the ball to Jalen Waddle more than David Blau to get the ball to DeAndre Hopkins? I trust Bridgewater in this case, but definitely the lowered floors here for that. But Godwin, like you mentioned, great floor there. McKinnon has just been a focal point in this passing game for half PPR. Definitely a start. So, Marcos, thanks again for tuning in. As you
and Denver
always,
just allowed Cam Akers to score like 35 points.
Yeah.
So I think McKinnon's going to be able to do something.
Yeah, even him and Pacheco, I could see them having
for sure.
Pathways to success. Keith, thanks, man. Thanks for hopping on Fourth and Frames.
Always enjoy it. Absolutely.
And for the rest of you out there, if we haven't gotten to your questions or you have more questions for us, hit us up at Fantasy and Frames on Twitter or at Jorge B. Edwards or at Keith Fleming. And again, like we do every week, man, the pregame show, we answer so many start and sit questions. We get to every single game. We talk about all the fantasy relevant players, all the different matchups you need to pay attention to, starting at 9:30 a.m. on New Year's Day, taking you up through noon before kickoff. So for Keith, I'm Jorge. Y'all have a great end of 2022. See you on Sunday.
Go Dogs.